Hi, my name's Christine. Thanks for joining me. I am here to help empower you and help you make lasting changes in your child's mealtime that will also hopefully leave you with a lot less stress, right? So, if you're new to my work, you can visit us at our website, foodologyfeeding.com, or you can get started by figuring out where your child is at with feeding by taking our very quick free quiz. It is at thepickiEatersTest.com, and you could learn in just 2 minutes what level your child is at with food, right? And what action steps that you can take next to help support them and move them to the next level. So today, our topic is why feeding therapy hasn't worked yet. And I have talked about this in the past, but I definitely have a lot of reasons why I think that you might be struggling still with feeding therapy. We've had a lot of parents come to us um, from other places, but also just from varied backgrounds. And I feel like over the years, I have like a good grasp on who's going to make progress and who isn't, right? And I could tell you the factors I think that affect if you're going to have progress with feeding therapy or not, right? So, and that's with us or with anyone, right? So this applies for anyone, for wherever you are. Okay, so feeding therapy in and of itself is not a super common thing that is easy to find. Um, we're located in New York, where I would say it's easier than most places to find a feeding therapist. Um, However, even that being said, there's still a lot of variety within those different types of therapists, right? So, and I've talked about this before, but there really isn't an actual program to become a feeding therapist, right? So it's usually a speech pathologist or an occupational therapist who has gone on their own to take additional coursework and to learn about all of the different facets of feeding that is not covered in a traditional graduate school program. So, not every speech therapist or occupational therapist is really qualified to do feeding therapy, but there isn't like a national test or anything that you have to pass to do feeding therapy or become a feeding therapist. It's sort of a given title of somebody who has taken courses and has experience with that population. That being said, as somebody who has taken, well over 30 courses in all different areas of feeding, I could tell you that just taking one or two courses is very different than taking 15 courses, right? And there's a lot of nuance between, okay, well, there's infant feeding, and then there's toddler feeding, and then there's more of like that school age type of a feeding. And then there's almost like that, like period, even their teens and adults, right? And you kind of have to address those in different ways, right? So there's some slightly different skill sets that will come for each of those levels, right? Um, and it's not even more about like feeding actually itself, like your oral motor skills. By two, you should be able to eat pretty much any food, right? You should have the oral motor skills to chew and swallow food safely, right? So it's more about the psychology and the mindset principles that go with kids as they age, that you have to change your approach to treating, I guess, is I guess maybe the best way to describe it. So when I started taking courses, I was like, oh, well, I'm missing that puzzle piece because I know how to do this part of it, but not that part of it, right? Or I know how to do the sensory part, but not the oral motor part. Or I know how to do this part of oral motor, but not for that age, right? So it is really complicated. It's not so much just putting food in your mouth or licking food and then you eat it and then you swallow it. Like there's actually a lot that goes into feeding, right? It's very complicated. It involves all your organs, all your sensory systems, muscles, your mindset, the psychology. There's just a lot going on, right? So, literally, finding the right type of feeding therapist for your child's age and developmental level itself could be a challenge, right? That is one thing to consider, is that maybe the person isn't a great fit for your child. They might be a great fit for a different population, or a different age group or whatever. But for your child, like, are they a good fit for your child, right? So that's one. Number two, is, beyond, let's just say, even finding somebody who is well qualified to work with your child, your situation, etc., right? The structure of traditional feeding therapy is usually outpatient clinic once a week. Sometimes if that person happens to accept insurance or Medicare, maybe you would get like 2 times a week for a half an hour. It's not a lot of time, right? So if you think about how many meals you would have during a typical week, right? You're not actually having a meal with your speech therapist. They're usually working on skills, building comfort, desensitizing, right? So that's not even a meal. But let's just say, like, there is actually a local place that actually does 17-minute sessions, right? So if you think about, even if you go once a week for 17 minutes, that's a very small part of that child's week, a very small part, right? So usually there's about 35 meals that you have in a week between main meals and snacks. And that's not including kids that kind of graze all day long. I'm just talking about 3 main meals and 2 snacks. And that would be 35 meals a week, right? So if you're talking about 20 minutes, 30 minutes, even an hour once a week, it's just not enough time to change habits and completely change mindset and all of the emotions that go into eating. That's going to, having that short amount of time with that one-on-one person is going to make progress get very stalled or delayed, right? So, well, how do we combat that? Well, we actually require all of our parents to be present for each session, or a caregiver, right? So that they are learning what we're doing, and then they can hopefully implement it during the week when they're with their child, when they're having the meals, right? So that is one way to sort of help speed up the progress and effects of feeding therapy, is to take and learn from the therapist when you're with them, and basically carry that into your whole week, and implementing, maybe one strategy that they did that week, but being consistent, right? So that's one way to hopefully make feeding therapy work when it's not currently. Okay. So that parent education piece is very lacking, I find. So, and here's the issue, right? So I found that there is more to this parent education piece, because even sometimes the parents would be sitting in the session, there's some other variables that are going to affect how much of it they take home with them. And just like our kids have their own cues for their environment and their different places, and, they might actually just feel more comfortable eating with the therapist in a different room. It's not their house, right? So there's a few variables there. But I find that parents aren't always, it might not be the best time for that parent to be learning and absorbing. So you may really want to sit there and absorb. But what if your child's just having an off day, and there's, we've had a kid who, he was switching schools, and it was like the first day of that new school, and it was just too overwhelming. Like, he shouldn't have even come, but it was like he wasn't accomplishing much that day because his sensory system and he was just overwhelmed. He was completely overwhelmed just by his day. So Asking him to do anything challenging above and beyond the bare minimum was met with resistance, and rightfully so, right? But you can imagine that it's not always going to be the best learning time for your child. And it's not always going to be the best learning time for the parent, right? So, just like our kids, sometimes we're more distracted than others. Sometimes we benefit from a quiet environment, or maybe we just benefit from the comfort of our own home or our own desk and chair or bed or whatever, wherever you like to sit and be quiet and learn, right? So, I was finding that even if parents were sitting, it wasn't always the best time for them to learn and absorb. Sometimes they were just trying to manage their kids, or they might have had another child with them because there was no one at home that could babysit their other sibling. So, okay, great. I'm watching what you're doing, but I'm also tending to this child, right? I don't know if you've ever been in that situation, but it's really hard to learn and absorb when you're also like juggling other things and you're, trying to like make sure they're polite and they're not throwing food and this child isn't ripping things off the wall. Like there's like sometimes a lot going on. So it's not always the best time for you to even learn, even if you want to be in the room learning. So that's like an added layer, right? So that's why I was like, all right, I think we need something where parents can learn at home. Take the time when they are ready to learn to absorb. If they have to go back and replay something, they can. Because the therapist might say some golden nuggets, but it just they might have missed the whole thing, right? And they might get home and be like, oh my gosh, wait, what did they say? Like, what am I supposed to be doing? I don't remember anymore. um, and that's like no fault of the parent or the therapist. It's just life, right? Like that's just how life is sometimes. So, that parent education piece is important, but sometimes it's really hard to get when you're in feeding therapy, even if you're sitting right next to them. Um, and sometimes you're just like not in the mood. Like you're not in the mood. Maybe they're not in the mood. Like it could be a whole thing, right? So having a structured program that you could watch at your leisure, I thought was very valuable to our families to help them get the information they needed when they were ready to receive it, right? Because I know personally, I learn best at night when everyone's asleep and it's quiet. I like going online, doing my little courses and learning new things, but I am not always in a great state of mind to be learning when there is a lot going on, or we're getting ready to do something, or if I'm actually at an appointment. Sometimes that's just not best for me to be learning new things. Okay, so how do we get this? How do we get some of these principles that we're learning and feeding into our home, I should say? Well, so a lot of our parents, like I said, if they don't know what they don't know, right? If they're not learning anything, that's one thing. But even if they know it, sometimes they're not implementing it. And routine and consistency are very key. Kids thrive when they have a routine and a structure. We absolutely know this, right? Ask any parent how their kids do, when there's a school break or something, right? A lot of parents are like, I miss our routine. The kids did so much better. Things are so much more chaotic because there's no structure. I've heard this probably hundreds of times, right? So it's a fairly universal principle that sometimes kids do better with structure, right? Parents and adults do better with structure too. So establishing routines and that are consistent. So it's not just doing it one time and thinking it's going to work and then forgetting about it. It's something that you're going to have to continuously implement and practice and work on, just like any other skill. The more time you spend with it, the better you'll get at it, right? And eating and learning about eating is really no different. And keeping those regular meal times, those regular snack times. We always talk about grazing and how we don't want kids grazing. So one thing you could even do today is just start to put a limit on your meal times. So, not that food is available anytime, anywhere, but you're going to have some special times of the day where your child is allowed to eat, right? Because that structure will build in some hunger, and we really do need that for feeding therapy to work. No one's going to want to try anything if they are constantly feeling full, right? So that's something else you can try. All right. Positive mealtime environment, right? So reducing stress and pressure at meals and making mealtimes enjoyable and a social occasion. So a lot of our parents get stuck in the technicalities of doing specific things, but they're forgetting about just making it fun and enjoyable experience. And sometimes that means pulling back a little, maybe doing less than what you're doing. Maybe you're even doing too much, right? It really will depend on your situation, but sometimes the parents will watch the therapist do something and forget that at home they are not emulating that same sort of pressure-free environment, right? So not carrying over that stress-free type of place can really hold kids back from making progress in therapy. Because remember, we really need that consistency throughout the week to see the progress in the next time you go to feeding therapy, right? So if you were basically like on them and like take a bite, you did it in feeding therapy. Why won't you do it here? Take another bite, right? That's not going to help you make progress in feeding therapy. That's actually going to pull them back from progress a little bit. So keeping those meal times positive, stress-free, that is going to help. It will help you to see progress faster for sure. Okay, so we talked about a lot of those things. I'm just looking at my notes here. Okay, are you addressing the 4 pillars? So if you haven't listened to the episode about the 4 pillars of feeding, please go and listen to that. But really quickly, the 4 pillars of feeding are oral motor, sensory, gut, and mindset. So are you actually addressing all 4 of those areas? A lot of times in feeding therapy, you're only addressing 1, maybe 2 of those areas tops. Okay, so we want to be making sure that if your child has a weakness in any of those areas, that is also being addressed, right? So that's why as part of our program, the first things that we have you do is get a baseline, develop a profile of exactly where your child is in all of those areas so that we know exactly what they need to work on and what lessons you need to watch to get them to make progress, right? So are you actually addressing all of the areas that need to be addressed? Oftentimes there just isn't even enough time. Like I said, if your session is between 17 minutes and even an hour, depending on your child, right? Do they take 30 minutes to warm up? Are they just getting going by the time therapy time is ending? That's all, very key for sure. So there really isn't always time to address all of those things, right? So having a program where you know that all of those pieces are able to be addressed is really awesome. A lot of times parents might say, well, they're already in feeding therapy, so I don't need a course. But the course could really help support what you're missing in feeding therapy. And that's why all of our parents that come for our weekly sessions now have access to this course, because it's so important for them to actually learn and implement every single week. And it's we want to make sure that all of those areas are being addressed and they're being targeted like consistently, right? So I know that was a lot of information. So let's just do I guess kind of like a quick recap, right? So feeding therapy times could be really short. It's just not always enough time. And sometimes you're not getting any education at all. And even if you are sitting with them, sometimes you're not in the right frame of mind. Your child isn't in the right frame of mind and they're kind of all over the place. It's really hard for you to learn and absorb that information that you need to take with you and carry out throughout the week, right? Not even knowing all of the pillars, like, are we actually addressing all of the areas of need that need to be addressed, right? Is there a missing puzzle piece there? Are we creating a positive mealtime environment at home? Are we doing our best to sort of emulate the positive, stress-free environment of therapy and bringing it into the home? A lot of times that piece could be missing and holding you back. Are you consistently incorporating these strategies into your routines, into your days and your weeks? Or are you just waiting for the next therapy session for the therapist to do it? If that's the case, I'm telling you, you are not going to make a lot of progress in feeding therapy, or it will take a very long time. Okay. Are you, are you engaged in the learning process along with your child? I guess is sort of the crux of this message. I think that I know, I don't even think that. I know, I have seen with my eyes that the parents who take the time to learn, who implement, who are consistent, they make the fastest gains. They make the most long-lasting gains. They're the most satisfied. They are happier. I mean, like, literally, like, everything is seemingly better than the parents that just wait for the next therapy session. And we have had both, right? And people will pay us to come once, twice, 3 times a week, and they are still not implementing anything at home. And it just makes everything take longer. And honestly, as a provider, I would rather discharge you in half the time and move on to another client who needs our help than have the same client who is struggling week after week and making slow progress. And you might think, oh, well, no, they just like money. Like, they would never get rid of a client. We actually have dismissed clients who weren't consistent, who weren't showing up, who weren't trying, because we really, I think we do have a reputation for making progress. So we don't want parents who are not going to do the work and make progress. We really want parents who are going to be dedicated and putting in some effort. Even if it's a small amount of effort, we do want our parents to have an understanding of what their child's issues are and what their role is in helping to make it better. Because relying just on the therapist is going to be harder on you, on your child, on your pocketbook, and on your therapist. So when we all work together, the outcomes for everyone improve tremendously. So if you are still not seeing progress in feeding therapy, there's probably one of these reasons that might be the cause. And if it's not, I would love to hear about it. Please tell me if I missed something or if I didn't really accurately portray why you might not be seeing progress. So I would love to hear more about that. So please, leave it in the comments, send me a DM on Instagram at Foodology Feeding. I do want to hear more about your thoughts on this episode. If you are struggling and you would like this extra support, if you would like to make sure you are addressing all 4 of the pillars that are applicable to your child's unique situation, please go to thepickeaterstest.com to take our 2-minute quiz and find out what level your child is at and where you can get started helping them. So hopefully we'll see you on the inside of that, and we will see you again next month. I hope you have a great week, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you for listening to How to Unpicky Your Picky Eater. To learn more about achieving your child's feeding goals, check out Christine's website at foodologyfeeding.com. And be sure to tune in next time to How to Unpicky Your Picky Eater.